Well, hello, welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. I'm so grateful you're joining us for another great episode here where we meet you in your pain and provide you a pathway through. Ultimately, we are having conversations with people who are walking through the valley of the shadow of death, following after Jesus in the midst of their pain and their trauma, not letting the enemy have the last word in their life. And so we're so grateful that you're joining us here on this platform, because that means that your heart is in the same place. That you know the enemy has tried to steal and rob from you some territory in your life, and you're standing up and saying, hey, I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to partner with God to take back my story. And so just grateful to spend some time with you this week. You know, every week it seems that we hear about another leader falling, whether it be a pastor, whether it be a nonprofit director, a public figure, somebody who is, it seems like, crumbling under the pressure of leadership. But what if the real breakdown didn't begin when they fell? What if it began long before, in some of the hidden places of unresolved pain and trauma? That's why I am so grateful we're having this conversation today with Dr. Nicholas Rowe and Sheila Rowe, because I have often wondered that as the landscape of Christian leadership has shifted dramatically over the past several years, as I've seen even heroes of mine, pastoral ministry leaders and heroes of mine that I would look up to and say, man, there's no way that they would ever fall. They have such a rock solid, airtight faith. Their foundation is built so strong that they're able to carry some heavy weights of leadership and they're not going to crumble. There's no way that they would. Their character is flawless. And yet I've watched as some of those heroes have fallen. And it's caused me to be, if I'm honest, disenfranchised. It's caused me to be disillusioned. It's caused me to take some introspection and some inventory of my own life and go, okay, how did this happen? And man, if it weren't for the grace of God, ergo I, how do I make sure that I'm not moving into that space? And what we talk about in this conversation today with Dr. Nicholas Rowe and Sheila Rowe is that all these things began well before the actual public fall occurred, and ultimately that there is a way to prevent this. And this is important for us to have this conversation so that we can, as we're leading other people, we can walk in the wholeness and the healing that is possible, not just possible, that is, I think, essential for us as we're carrying responsibility of ministering to other people. You know, Sheila Rowe is no stranger to the Nothing is Wasted podcast, Nothing is Wasted community. She was featured on episode 128, where we explored her powerful work on healing racial trauma. But today she joins me, along with her husband, Dr. Nicholas Rowe, who's a professor of leadership and a historian with a background in ministry, academia, and nonprofit leadership. And together they've written this timely book, Healing Leadership Trauma, Finding Emotional Health and Helping Others Flourish. Healing Leadership Trauma. We'll put the link below in the show notes. We'll also put it right below this YouTube video if you're watching this. And we explore some pretty amazing pillars and themes in this conversation. We talk about how unaddressed early trauma shapes our leadership. We talk about how we're not wired to carry the weight of leadership alone, how leadership can become this false identity, how the idol of an impressive leader has to die if we're going to build healthy organizations, and if we're going to help people, heal and be whole, and how healing is possible even while you're still leading. That's one of the biggest dilemmas that I've experienced. Is here I am. I think about this tension as a leader, as a Christian leader, and as also a human being who's gone through trauma and brokenness and hurt and grief and pain, and is also continuing to. I mean, as you just walk about life, you carry the residue of the brokenness of this world. As you experience betrayals, as you experience hurt, as you experience grief, as you experience all of these things, these places where you felt like you weren't, where there was some kind of deficiency in care throughout your life. So whatever it is, however you want to qualify it, there's this tension that we all land in. Do I have to choose between being whole or being useful? Like, do I step back from carrying out my purpose, serving and working in ministry in order to heal? Or do I keep doing that? Like, where is the interplay between these two things? Do I have to choose between slowing down to heal or showing up to serve? It almost feels like these two things can become in contest with each other. And so that's what we begin to parse out in this conversation. That's why I'm so grateful that you've joined us here today. Many of you are looking for how to not just take your pain and turn it around into purpose. You're already in the middle of ministering to other people. Maybe you've come here because you are a ministry leader. You are on some level helping others, and that in the middle of ministry, you have encountered some major misery. I think about Matthew chapter 14, where Jesus goes away from the crowd to try to grieve the loss of his cousin and John the Baptist, after he hears the news that John the Baptist has been beheaded. And it says the crowd ran around to catch up to him. And here he is confronted with what many scholars believe is over 20,000 people that are asking something from him, that want him to heal them and minister to them and give them something. And he is depleted. And yet we see that he performs the greatest miracle in volume that we have of record, the feeding of the 5,000. And so we have this picture of Jesus in the middle of his greatest misery, stepping into great ministry. So how do we find that tension? How do we continue to show up and continue to serve and at the same time slow down to heal? And what's the interplay between the two? That's what we talk about at length in this conversation. So glad that you're here to join us. Hey, listen, before we dive into this conversation, I do want to invite you to a Zoom call that I hold just about every single month called 5 Steps to Taking Back Your Story, no matter what you've gone through. You can go to nothingiswasted.com/start here to register for that next one. And it is always a sacred time where we talk about maybe you're looking to take a first step or a next step in your healing, where we'd love to connect you with some of the tools, some of the resources that we provide at Nothing is Wasted to help you on your healing journey. That's what we're here for. We're here to meet you in your pain and to provide a pathway through. Because listen, there is a pathway through your pain. There is a pathway through your trauma. Your trauma does not have to define you. It does not have to stick with you so that it debilitates you, so that it affects and impacts how you show up in this world in an adverse way. You can walk in wholeness. You can walk in healing. And we're going to talk about how to get started on that journey on that Zoom call. nothingiswasted.com/start here to register for that. Okay, let's go ahead and dive into this conversation. Before we do, let's take a quick moment to listen to a word from one of our sponsors that is making this episode possible today. Well, Nicholas, it's great to have you on the podcast. And Sheila, it's great to have you back on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. This is just an honor to be with you guys.
It's a pleasure. Looking forward to it.
I would love for you guys to do this. Tell us a little bit about yourselves. You know, Sheila, people can go back and listen to, let me see. I had it pulled up just a second ago. We recorded back in 2020 and it was episode 128. So they can go back and listen to some of your story and some of the work that you are doing specifically with, racial reconciliation and racial trauma. Yeah. But I'd love to hear a little bit of your life together. I mean, this is just a cool thing to have you guys on together. So talk to me about life and what you guys do. And then we'll dive into this new book and some of the implications behind it and the things that led to you guys writing this.
Yeah. Wow. Sure. Well, who want to start, Nick or me? Either one.
Go right ahead.
So we, a lot of our, like this book came out of a place of our doing ministry together. And so just as a background, Nick is going to talk more, I'm sure, about his background as an educator, as a historian. And, but we also did a lot of work together in inner healing ministry with a lot of them were college-age folk and post-college, and we did that here in the U.S., in Boston. We also did some, guests at conferences, etc. But we also spent 10 years in South Africa, and 2016 we came back. So it was like 2005 to 2016. But during the time in South Africa, we did develop a program called The Well, and in the context of that, taking a lot of emerging as well as established leaders through this healing process, a lot of college students as well. And I would say that where we are right now in terms of whether it's the healing racial trauma book that I had done, but specifically around leadership. It's come from that place of ministering together, really helping leaders to really look at what are the issues that get in the way of their personhood, their spiritual formation, their relationship with God, and what healing needs to happen in that context. So as background, I spent 30 years as a therapist in private practice, but also worked in like a church counseling center as well as in secular settings. And from that, also doing a lot of spiritual direction. And so all of that comes, informed my prior books, but also definitely this latest one on healing leadership trauma.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nicholas, go ahead and jump in there. I'd love for you to kind of add some from your perspective as well, just kind of especially why this book was so. I mean, it's great that you guys have joined up together to write this, but why was this so meaningful for you?
Yeah. Just a little bit about my background, a combination of things. I am an immigrant. I was born in the United Kingdom, and my family emigrated to the U.S. when I was about 9 or 10 years old. And I think it's important for me to mention that in the midst of this context and as a big part of my story. And for reasons that I can get into a little bit more detail over the course of our conversation today.
Yeah.
But also, I'm a historian by training, and much of my leadership context has been in higher education, but also in various nonprofit expressions where I've been in senior management or senior leadership. Today, I am a professor of leadership, Hanson Professor of Leadership at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. And so my work now is preparing leaders, Christian leaders in the church and in the general society to learn how to lead from a healthy space and to lead well. Mm-hmm. And as Sheila has mentioned, we've been involved in ministry together over the last 30 years, as long as we've been married. But what I'm bringing to the table in terms of the book is my experience, leadership experience, but also a lot of reflection on what healthy leadership means, a lot of reflection in the framework in which we lead biblically within the social ethics, Christian social ethics, and what that implications that has for those that leaders serve. So there is a natural overlap in terms of my better half's background, looking at the inner lives of people and my understanding in terms of how that reflects in terms of how we lead and the implications for our leadership, right?
Yeah.
Those two things can't be separated. And so right. I really feel like there's a natural overlapping of things in terms of our expertise and vocational calls, which makes for a unique offering in terms of this book.
Yeah. Well, this is such a critical time it feels like in history right now. I mean, we're in a cultural moment that is akin to, Sheila, the last time you and I spoke, right? We were in a very cultural moment, it seems like. But right now we see so many ministry leaders, pastors, who it seems like week after week after week, we're hearing stories of these mega church pastors or these ministry leaders who are falling. And, my spiritual director / mentor told me that if your inner person becomes incongruent with your outer person, what you're presenting, then it's recipe for disaster. It's only right. Your soul begins to dry up. And that is especially true when it comes to ministerial context. Absolutely. I would love, before we kind of dive into some of the things you guys are talking about in this book, Nicholas, you mentioned sharing a little bit, like your own story kind of plays into this. Share with us a little bit about that, why that has been such a critical part of now your passion for helping to intercept leaders in these situations.
Sure. Real briefly, I was born to parents of Afro-Caribbean origin, and they were part of the Windrush generation, right? These were folks part of the British Empire Afro-Caribbeans, part of the British Empire, and a whole lot of folks were called to come back to Great Britain after World War II to help to rebuild in the wake of World War II. But life was difficult for both of them. I mean, they worked the best that they knew how, but they faced a lot of racial injustice. It was very, very difficult. Uh, and that that was a big part of my early formation. My father would come home often very, very angry, and it really impeded the relationship that he had with us as children. I have two sisters. It was very, very hard to emotionally connect with him, and I think that type of disruption in terms of a healthy relationship with parents growing up, it was always a sort of a negative, always disciplinary and harsh, uh, really created issues, particularly around attachment, right? And that's one of the things we talk about in the book.
Right.
Disordered attachment for me. The good thing was we emigrated to the States, and that's a whole little bit of a story in and of itself. But my parents, soon after coming back to the States, realized something was off spiritually. They were both raised in Christian homes, but then they got nominal. But after recommitting their lives to Christ, and particularly my father, he really changed. He was the transformation was immediate. All of a sudden, I had the father that I always wanted to have, right? And he was more deeply engaged and involved in our lives and everything else. Um, but then, my first year of university, he passed away, uh, and that disorganized attachment never really quite went away. But my father's passing away, my mother's trying to help me to prepare for the real world in terms of how to engage the world, particularly how to engage society in which she made it very, very clear. You're an immigrant. This is a white man's society right here. And for you to be able to succeed, you've got to be better than everybody else. You've got to achieve more than everybody else. You have to be 150%. 100% is not enough. That was a formational
Yeah.
dimension. And even though it came out of a space of genuine parental concern, did leave a lot of damage in terms of how I felt I had to posture myself in the world. That I had to be the smartest person in the room, that I had to be the expert, that nobody could know more than me if I was able to succeed. That and the loss of my father and a real anger toward God around that
Yeah.
made for a very unhealthy emotional and spiritual mix for 10 years.
Wow.
Um, and and only when I saw the generational repetition with my own children did I realize I was in deep trouble and God needed to intervene. And he did so in a rather miraculous way. And so I've been on a healing journey ever since. I will not say that I've arrived. I still have to
Yeah.
continue to learn how to live in a healthy way. There are repeated triggers that come up for which I have to continue to learn the things about how to reconnect with God or reconnect with others in certain ways. But I'm grateful for some of the things, some of the disciplines, practices, and people that God has placed around me that has enabled me to walk in healthier ways and to continue to heal, and which I can now talk about with others with regard to walking in a way that's restorative.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Wow. Wow. Phew, man. Yeah, I love the fact that you said God intervened in a miraculous way and then followed it up immediately with like, so I've been on a healing journey.
mm,
Those two things can often seem dissonant when we think about the idea of like, oh, God just delivered me and poof, here it is. Boom. Now I'm healed. Here
no,
we go. No, it became the catalyst for this healing journey for you.
correct.
And you're continually having to take these moments where you experience these triggers and you're going, okay, God, all right.
Yeah,
I'm not going to run away
yeah,
from this. I'm not going to shove it down. I'm not going to suppress it. I'm becoming aware because of my triggers now, and I'm going to lean into you and the healing work that you're doing in me.
yeah. There are always deeper, deeper,
Yeah.
deeper, deeper layers to
Oh
this,
yeah.
right?
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
if it goes back to the beginning, I mean,
Yeah.
and that's where we're significantly formed and shaped. Uh, we don't arrive totally until we now see clearly in his presence, that beautiful
Right.
verse in 1 Corinthians 13. We see darkly now, but then we will see face to face, right? And
Mm,
then, but
so good.
but in the process of the walking, it's an opportunity for God to glorify Himself, I feel,
Mm,
as I continue to relate my story, but also as God continues to speak in my brokenness. So these are,
amazing.
yeah, this is the basis of hope
Wow.
in many different ways. Yeah.
Well, this is a lot of what you guys are talking about too when it comes to leaders. Healing leadership trauma, finding emotional health, and helping
Mm-hmm.
others flourish is the name of the book. But you're talking about the implications of our really of our childhood, family of origin, attachment, all these things that really do inform how we show up in leadership, who we are as we show up in leadership, and that they end up getting exposed. Let me ask you this: if we're going to take kind of like a take on this, again, cultural moment where we're seeing these pastors,
Yeah.
these ministry leaders, these whatever leaders in general falling. What is it that's gotten these leaders to this position where they're having this remarkable impact, and then all of a sudden it seems like overnight, right outside looking in, overnight, boom, something has gone awry.
Yeah. Well, I would say that one of the issues is around just the term leadership trauma. So when we use that term, we're really looking at there are three particular areas or streams that affect leaders. And so the first one being that early formational issues. So we mentioned attachment. So it's attachment within the context of family, community. So a leader is dealing with that. And so these leaders that we're seeing falling typically are having to deal with these three areas. And so one is not having addressed early formational issues, trauma, pain, and whether they're in denial about it or they know it's there and then they've figured out some coping mechanism to try to
Right.
mask it over.
Right.
So they're dealing with the past, they're dealing with the present. So the present being that, these high profile, charismatic men, women too, but there's lots of responsibilities put on them. There's lots of expectation. They've got to bring in those numbers. They're getting lots of kudos because of the how many people got saved that week or baptisms and so they've got to keep it going. They've got to keep it going regardless of whether they're dealing with the past pain or current pain, including issues around their families, and that things are going on at home. They've got to deal with that as well. And then there also this issue around they're also forward thinking. So as a leader, there's an expectation that you're a visionary in some way. So you're setting vision, but if you've not dealt with those other prior things, vision can be really scary because vision, there's a fear that often drives that maybe what's going to happen is I'm not going to make it. I'm going to fail. Or if I've had a past failure, it's going to repeat itself. And so you look at all of those three things and what we see is that leaders are then driven to other ways of managing it. And so that's when we start seeing the addictions, and whether it's substances or it's people, it's pornography or whatever it is. But there are ways of I can't be authentically who I am, or not even who I am, but what I'm struggling with. I can't share that with anyone. So then I'm going to have to mask it in some way. Or there's this whole notion of that some leaders get really bigger. They either get really bigger or really smaller. And so bigger as in, the top end is a narcissist, where it's everything's about them. It's all about bowing down to them. It's, yeah. And so, and it becomes, they creating this toxic environment and thinking that somehow if I get people to just be afraid, then I'll get them to do what I want.
Very
And
Machiavellian,
yeah. And so we have that whole piece as another way of just trying to make ends meet. Or, the sad part is that we've seen leaders who've fallen who have done amazing things, you're right. And yet they had to be perfect
Right.
to the rest of the world. And so they couldn't share.
Yeah.
And then you have leaders who just are kind of they're there almost in body only because they are totally burnt out. And so, we're seeing this crisis in leadership because
Yeah.
we're not dealing with any of these three stages. And so most of the books that are out there around leadership, a lot of them are around how to be a better leader. How do you
Yeah.
get your team to do whatever? How do
Right.
you
Techniques
get
and
yeah.
skills.
Yep.
Yeah, how do you get your numbers up? How do
Yep.
you, how to have emotional intelligence, which is like, okay,
Mm.
if that becomes like a technique, then it's not
It's
real.
manipulation if it
Oh
becomes a
yeah, oh yeah,
technique, right?
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow, that's really
Can I
yeah,
add
go
a
ahead,
couple more
Nicholas.
things too in
Yes,
addition to that? Because
please.
and this is all critical. It's also important to understand that leadership in and of itself is just tough.
Mm.
And I think many people in leadership have not been developed well to know how to deal with the challenges that you will face when you lead.
Yeah.
So if they have not been developed well, they're walking into a context with all these expectations, and immediately our flesh is all of a sudden going wiring about how to figure all this out,
Wow.
and inevitably we will not do it well. They're, we're not trained well. We are not formed well
Mm.
to handle what it means to be a leader. I think often of the incidents of the kingdom of, well, the people of Israel getting their first king,
Right.
and God giving Samuel object lesson and saying, look, they've rejected me. But you
Mm,
know what? Give them what they want. But
well,
let me
well,
tell you, what will happen when they have a human being taking on this burden of
Yeah.
what it means to be in charge of everybody. This is what will happen. And then God lays it out. This was no
Wow.
secret. God warned them clearly. All of a sudden, he's going to, you know, be more wealthy at your expense. All of a sudden, he's going to take your sons to be in his armies, to make him look ego, to make him look good. He's going to take your daughters to take care of his kitchens. He's going to do we are not built as human beings to lead.
Yeah.
We're not.
Yeah.
We're not built as human beings to handle all the responsibilities. We just aren't.
That's right. I'm glad you're saying this
we
because I was going
just,
to ask Nicholas. I'm like, it just seems like there's something systemic here. Like it seems like there's something just broken in general with the construct of it all.
yeah.
yeah, we're not wired to handle those types of burdens. God has to be alongside and in us to be able to do the things that he is calling us to
Yeah.
do in leading.
Yeah.
Mm.
The weight of leadership will break us, whether we like it or not,
Mm.
or we end up pushing the brokenness onto the people we serve, one way or the other.
Mm.
One of those things will happen. If God is
Wow.
not, the Holy Spirit is not in us, helping us to lead according to the way God is calling us to lead his people and to lead anyone.
Yeah.
If he's not there in us, we will be distorted
Right.
under
Right.
the weight of leadership. That's what happens.
Mm. Mm. It, here's the thing that, I mean, you guys have identified it and called it out already, that there is so much weight and responsibility on leaders. There's so much frenetic activity. I mean, it's just busyness and you're going from this to this to this, and so much really meaningful work that they're taking part in. So it's certainly not all bad. In fact, most of it's good, but it can begin to shroud and cover the things that are being left undealt with.
Yes.
And you can mask that really well for a season. Sometimes it feels like the solution is, sometimes it can feel like it's binary. It's almost like, as a leader myself, and I see brokenness in my own heart, and I go, man, do I need to step away from this responsibility to like deal with this? Or is it possible to continue to lead and continue to work? Obviously, situations are all different. There's certain things that would necessitate someone really having to step and sideline themselves to really get healing and wholeness. But like, to what degree are we able to to actually do this work, this inner work, while we're serving people outside of us.
Yeah. You know what? I think that if you look at the Israelites and Moses and the point where his arms are falling and God really saying, okay, you need other people. And I think it's the same thing with leaders is that we absolutely need people that we can hold us up and support us and to give us these safe enough spaces where we can then share what it is that we're struggling with, but not even just as a kind of a dumping ground, but people who really will walk with us and hold us accountable and to challenge us. I think about Nathan with King David and just like who are those people that as we're walking through, we shouldn't be walking through it alone. And I think that it's oftentimes, even though there's a board, maybe there's a church board or there are elders or whatever, but as we've seen with a lot of these major falls, is that there were elders and there were boards, etc., and the person still lied. They still lied. They still were undercover, and in some ways with these really high profile ones, like the community really thought like, oh, this person is kind of above reproach, versus as a leader, we all need spaces where we're challenged, where they're safe enough that we can come and say, this is what I'm struggling with, whatever that struggle is.
Right.
In addition, it is therapy is really good, and particularly for leaders who, you have leaders in some cases who have these background kind of stories, early formational traumas, from their family life, and yet they're not, they've not found, or the people around them haven't made the connection. Like we need to really come alongside and encourage that person to go into therapy, to look at how their early attachment issues are now bleeding into their lives. And counseling will help to do that. So that is something that happens outside of maybe an internal, you have your board, you have your elders. You may choose to have an accountability group, but also therapy. All of those things can help support a leader to begin to heal, so they don't have to go to the medications that are going to try to help them to feel better.
I should say that I know as a matter of personal practice, but also relationship. I mean, there are three men that I meet with monthly. We've been doing this for 20 some odd years now. And I have given them full permission to call me on all my nonsense. Um, I have given them explicit permission to ask any question, anytime, anywhere that they want. So, and it's an important practice for me because I'm good at deceiving myself.
Yeah.
I'm good at rationalizing things.
Right.
I'm good at rationalizing the types of actions that will not bear fruit in the long run. And so,
You're reading my mail right now, Nicholas. You're reading my mail.
hey, but I think even if I'm in the midst of really a challenging, tough time, they know me, so they know to go back to the script and ask the same old questions. Okay, so when was the last time you had exercise? That was the last time I met with them. And I was talking about how all of a sudden I'm getting all these aches and pains and I'm grouchy and feeling, there's all sorts of things. And when was the last time you've exercised? Exercise is good for you, right? You know you need to do this. This is one of the ways that you disseminate stress or anything else like that. Or, so that's just an example of this. And I really feel like it's a tremendous gift. But it does have to work, right? I think we have to be on our toes with each other and not to be afraid to be blunt around those things. We need people to be blunt with us, and to be and just to be thoroughly honest in that way. So it's critical. It's a critical practice.
How do we and how do leaders specifically, if they're listening, how do they find spaces where they can take off the mask and truly confess without feeling fear of either eroding any kind of like the influence they have, losing their job? You know, I mean, I think that's a lot of people, their fear is like, all right, specifically a pastor. Well, I can't open up the book to anybody in my congregation because there's no way, like, I'm supposed to be their pastor. So do I find that outside of, you know, there's been a whole movement for decades now where people have just, and this is part of what you were talking about with the people of Israel, placed leaders on pedestals. So even an effort sometimes to go like, please don't place me on a pedestal. Please don't, like, no, 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 no. It almost falls on deaf ears, right? And people will say, oh yeah, no, we don't place you on a pedestal. But the second that they get wind of, or they get you try to be vulnerable and confess certain things, it's like, boom, something shatters in their world. And now it's, they're out to take you down. That's the fear of a leader, right? That's what every leader is going, I don't know where to go with this. So how do we create those spaces? Like, what does that look like? It's tricky. It's nuanced, it feels like.
You know what? I think that one thing is that there are options apart from counseling, which is kind of an outside thing, but also spiritual direction is another space where people can share. I also want to just add a caveat here, and that is that in the context of therapy, the issues of if a person is engaging in behavior that is actually harmful to someone else or potentially dangerous to someone else, they do not deserve cover.
Right.
They don't.
Right.
They don't, because it's not even good.
It's a very important distinction, Sheila.
Yes, the people that they're serving. It's not good for that or the person who's at risk. It's also not good for the person, the leader.
Yeah.
In that it will require a stepping down.
Yeah.
If harm is happening, stepping down, doing some intensive work.
Right.
And it may be that that's not, so if the leader has a vulnerability in a particular area and has abused that and then believes that, oh, they can just go away for 2 weeks and then come back. No, because of that level of vulnerability, you really shouldn't be in a particular population.
Yeah.
Because the risk is like so high. And particularly if the leader has not dealt with the inner stuff, it is going to repeat itself. It just will. And
the determination as to when to come back actually should be out of your hands.
Exactly.
That's good.
Yes. Yep. Yes.
That's good.
And maybe even out of your congregation's hands or your employer's hands. It really needs to be something completely outside the system.
Yeah.
And I know some denominations have that framework. For a good reason, and that's not necessarily a guarantee that it works. I mean, we've seen stories about how that gets handled, but I think if there's a flip side to some of these things, the exposure of some of these things exposes some of the systems and how they work to try to conceal. And now, we just can't do that anymore. It just no. But anyway,
and it doesn't. The ultimate thing is that it's the focus then just becomes. It's less about the people. So there's this weird dance almost in terms of the leaders' need for healing, accountability, etc., and the congregation and the need to protect the sheep.
Yeah.
And so the priority is as a leader, it's the sheep.
It's the sheep. Yeah.
It's the sheep are not abused and mishandled. And so if a leader finds themselves in a place where they are doing that, they really need to step back. And, the thing around our relationship with God and the fact that, the scripture talks about, you really shouldn't be aspiring to be a leader. There's a lot of responsibility, a lot of consequences. Like that shouldn't be the priority. It should be that how am I going to tend to the sheep like a good shepherd? How am I creating a safe space for my leaders my parishioners to flourish? And if I can't do that, I personally need to stop and get at what the root of this is. And in many cases, redemption can occur. Healing
Right.
can happen in the context of being really intentional about it, but it may mean stepping down, and in some cases, it may mean losing a position for a time.
Can I add something to that? I want to go
Please,
back
yes.
to something that Sheila said about, you know what, you really shouldn't be in a hurry
Yeah.
to
Mm,
be. Ambition, man, is poisonous. Yeah.
Yeah.
mm,
So, I'm teaching some a class with some seminarians on leadership trauma right now, and I know this is coming out later, so this is fine. So, but there was this story about Augustine
Mm.
that when he heard that he had been appointed the next bishop of Hippo, he sat down and bawled his eyes out
Yeah.
mm,
because he knew the degree of responsibility that meant, and he was just freaking out about
Mm.
being able to do right by it.
mm.
That's the type of persons we
Right.
need as
Right.
leaders.
Mm,
We
Yeah.
really need folks who really are fully aware that this is a deep calling. And particularly within the church, I understand, but just full stop across the board. I mean, I think and this goes back to the deformed nature of the flesh in us,
Mm.
and how it's so easy to see leadership as a means of my own way of making myself better, to define myself.
Yeah.
My definition is now that I'm a leader. That's how I define myself. And so when I'm no
mm.
longer a leader and no longer in charge, then what am I?
Mm.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Mm,
so if I am seeking to be a leader, and there's this unconscious way of saying, "Hey, if I am a leader, now I'm somebody,"
Mm.
as opposed to, I mean, if we are in Christ, we are a new creation. You always were so. You were God's child before any of this,
That's
yeah,
right. Yeah.
yeah.
and so the idolatry
Mm.
around leadership is the poison,
Mm,
frankly, that sets many of us up
mm,
for failure. It sets many of us up. It revisits it. It creates the trauma that affects not just us, but the people that we lead.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm saying this as one who's not been. It's not just being this type of person in the church. I think even in the secular realm, it's the same thing. It
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I really do feel like, although we can talk a lot, obviously in this context and everything else in the church, I think leadership across the board is significantly impaired. We're seeing
Yeah.
horrible demonstrations of leadership right now,
Right.
where, as Jesus cleanly said, we're supposed to be servants,
Yeah.
mm,
right? And even that needs a bit of unpacking.
mm,
But many of us today are sort of using it to make ourselves feel better. We're feasting off the sheep
Mm.
rather than
Wow.
trying
mm,
to serve the sheep and helping them to become more healthier as a
mm.
Wow.
result of the actions that we take. And
Yeah,
God help us.
yeah.
We
Mm,
we we really need to be aware of to whom ultimately we are accountable in this position. And that's what should make us think twice about all of a sudden wanting to be in charge,
That's great.
right?
Yes, man.
So
Yeah, it seems like, to your point, that there's this out of balance thing that's happening where, you think about responsibility and privilege. I
yeah.
talk about this to my kids very simply. It's, hey, there are privileges that we are giving you, but it's going to have to be weighted with responsibility.
hmm
You have a mantle now with this privilege of freedom
Mm,
to do whatever, right? But you've
yeah.
got to have the sense of responsibility. I can't give you this privilege unless you have that sense of responsibility. And it seems like it's
Mm,
way out of balance when it comes to
Yeah.
a lot of leadership, that they're looking at the privilege, so to
yes.
speak, but
Yeah.
they're not thinking about the weight of responsibility. It should
Yeah.
be absolutely the opposite, to your point. This, like,
Mm,
man, this responsibility and this burden, right? This divine stewardship is so heavy.
mm,
I don't think
mm,
I want it. But
yeah.
if God, you're calling me to it, I'll walk in it
Yeah.
with humility, with a servant mind, and a
Mm.
servant heart. and there really should be minimal privileges, so to speak,
Mm,
Mm.
mm,
in
mm.
the midst of that leadership. And that would
Yeah.
hopefully start to right the ship a little bit when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah. You know what? I also want to say that it's even in the context of everything that we've said, that God loves the person.
Yes.
Yeah.
God loves the person. The person is made and created in God's image,
Yeah.
and so precious that Jesus died for
Yes.
that leader. And so, when we think of like even Jesus's baptism, like the Father saying, "This is my Son, who I am well pleased," and even this is before Jesus went to the cross.
That's right.
And so, in a similar way for the leader, just as a backdrop in terms of having that secure identity that they are beloved of God, and that this is not about, and it can easily skew into, like, God, use me up. Like, I want to, by the end, I just want to be dragged across the finish line. And, you can cherry pick and find some scriptures that kind of say that. But the reality is that God loves us so much and wants healing for us so much that even if there's a call at the expense of your own soul, God is saying you are actually more important,
Wow.
as important and more important. So to attend to your what's going on internally in you, how you're thinking, your early formation, and the things that need to change and heal in you. God, our healing, our minds are being renewed. God is at work in each of us as an individual, as a leader. And so we need to have that in the forefront, that even beyond, because I think some leaders get caught up in like the big platform and the people and the whatever, like, look at what I'm doing,
Right.
and God is saying, I'm looking at you, like I see you, and the Holy Spirit is pointing out some things
Yeah.
to the individual. He's to say, pay attention
Yeah, that's good.
to this. Come to me
Mm.
with your pain, your fear, your anxieties about the future, the present. Still processing stuff from the past. Like, I'm here to receive that, to receive you, and to heal you. Yes, I'm gonna.
Mm.
And he's concerned about everybody else as well, and the
Right.
sheep, and all the things that we've talked about. But the individual leaders shouldn't get lost in the
So good.
conversation.
Mm.
Yeah, I think.
Can we
Go ahead,
can,
Nicholas.
go
Yeah.
ahead?
No.
Well, I can riff all day long, but I don't know if there's
That this.
specific things you
That's
wanted
why you
to
guys are
talk
on
about.
here. It's not. This is not about me riffing. This is about you guys. Come on, I want to
Yeah.
hear.
Look, I'm thinking a lot these days too. Um, again, I'm working with some of my seminary students right now, and just talking about the nature of leadership. And one of the things
Yeah.
that we're grappling with is the sort of systemic things in place, the model that we have of this sort of elevated one great man of God type of thing,
You're right.
right? So you have this, and I think you, Dave, you mentioned this earlier, how sometimes the congregation wants our pastor to sort of be the impervious
Right.
one that sits up there and forgetting all the discussions of Hebrews 6, like sometimes our priests have to do sacrifices for ourselves because we screw up just as much as everybody
Right.
else.
Right.
The whole
Exactly.
even the whole provision within the
Mm,
Levitical code talks about the priest goes in first and sacrifices for himself because he's
Yes.
not good enough. But then here's
Yes.
Jesus, our great high priest, right? And
mm,
I wonder, if it's actually healthy for us, for these types of systemic structures where there is the great man,
Yeah.
the great person of God up there. And I know it's easy to imply and read all that from Old Testament and everything else, great man things. But I wonder if that's the way things should operate. What about collective leadership? What
mm,
about first among equals type of leadership? What about you know I mean, speaking of Moses, Aaron and her, more
Right.
figuratively, Aaron and her, but even more than that, that there's a group of people working
Yeah.
together very closely as a team to try to advance objectives and purposes, and specifically within the church and Christian organizations, the objectives that God has given to an organization or a congregation or anything else like that. I mean, we don't have elders just for window dressing. Are they leading with you?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Can I
Am
just
I
add one thing,
preaching?
Nick, and that
Go
is
Yeah.
ahead.
So good.
the inclusion of women
Yes,
Yes.
please.
in
Yes,
that.
yes,
Amen,
yes,
Sheila. Yes.
yes,
Really, because we,
yeah,
in terms of that team,
Yeah.
the team
yeah.
needs to reflect the congregation,
Well, and not just that,
and the
like there just
input.
seems to be, I mean, there are blind spots that
Oh
even
yeah,
from a gender standpoint that men
yes,
are going to have, that there is certain
absolutely.
levels of, I mean, I'm going to tell you, the women in my life right now, they've
Mm.
keen sense of discernment.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
You know, I look
Yeah.
at my wife and I'm like, listen, I am blind to a whole lot of stuff. And
Mm.
she goes, if she gets that little thing that's like, I don't know about that. I'm just kind
Oh
of
yeah,
having this, right? This intuition. I've started to learn, I don't feel that at all, but I'm going to like
This,
heed to this, you know? So you're so right.
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the chapters in our book, I mean, a couple of the chapters in our book
Mm.
talk about the ways in which our particular society is set up that tends to marginalize, obviously, um, voices of women and folks of color.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you consider the church in the U.S. right now, I think increasingly is more people of color, frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, the numbers are starting
Mm.
to, it becomes essential in our work to acknowledge places where I don't know what I'm doing and I'm going to sit down and shut up and listen,
Yeah.
Mm.
right?
So good.
Uh,
Mm.
and so, even in the context of leadership, uh, you know, I'm just saying that the structure, and just going back to what I said, I think the social structures and the brokenness within how we want to be led sets up leaders for failure.
Yeah.
And so, to counter that, we we can choose to intentionally say, no, I'm not going to do all this by myself. Look, you may give me the title and the paycheck, but here is how I wish to operate. And so here are the folks around me. And yes, they're going to be wise voices of folks outside of my own context and everything else that are going to be around me so that there is discernment and prayer
Mm.
and accountability and things like that. So, um, yeah, I'm just putting that on the table,
Yeah.
um, learning from other sorts of contexts throughout the global church where we see a lot of this too,
Yeah.
and how that needs to function and operate.
Mm.
Um, because our flesh is our flesh,
Right. Right.
and our cultural formation in some ways leads us into ways that may not necessarily be the way that God wants us to operate.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
good.
I also think that just in terms of the book, so healing leadership trauma, in terms of our really unpacking all of these things, but with
Right.
an aim towards, um, we mentioned in the introduction that the sole purpose isn't about how to be a better leader,
Right.
but a
That's right.
beautiful byproduct of actually going through this process of looking at what are the things that get in the way and how God wants to meet us. So every chapter really
Yep.
focuses on different issues, but there are practices, there are prayers, there are reflection questions, all of that of helping people to really unpack these different
Mm,
issues and to invite God in that process of revealing what that is, but also of healing.
Yeah.
And ultimately, a beautiful byproduct is that we will lead better.
That's right.
We will help be thinking more about how am I helping those who I'm leading to flourish. And whether it's our core leadership team to help them flourish or the people who are sitting in the pews. Like the end goal will happen once we've attended to what's going on internally
That's
and
right.
we have the supportive structures around us and people to hold us accountable to really move forward as the Lord is leading.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up, Sheila, because that's what's imperative about this. This is not about just becoming a better leader.
Yeah.
This is not another like book of axioms or tricks on how to become that better leader. This is about your soul finding wholeness again and being in oneness with Christ. And then out of the overflow of that,
Absolutely.
you're leading others into it. My wife and I talk about this all the time. We're like, hey, are we conducting a life, living a life with Christ that is one that people would want to follow?
That's good.
Right?
That's
like
good.
inner life is our like how we're conducting our family, because it can be so easy to just overlook that stuff that's going on right here because you feel the sense of responsibility that you've got to, tend to whoever it is that you're leading your sphere of influence. But it's like, if we can get back to the simplicity of like, what does it look like in our own lives, inner life, in our own home?
Yeah.
And then the overflow of that, it's the spillover that becomes our leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. That's really good.
Guys, I wish I could sit here and talk to you guys about this forever because I feel like we could. Nicholas, I'm loving just riffing with you on this. I didn't even get to 80% of my questions, but that's okay. You guys really filled in so much. This is important, guys, this conversation, those of you guys who are watching this and listening to this, because we're not just talking about, how trauma in each of our lives as leaders impacts the way we lead. We're also, what they're bringing forward in the book is talking about even the trauma you experience while you're in leadership, the hurt, the woundings, the pain, the stuff that kind of becomes residue that you carry with you in leadership. Inevitably, it's going to happen. And then also how we as, we have leaders around us that we look to. How do we support them? And how do we make sure that we're understanding the way that God has designed things to work in a really healthy way to make sure our leaders are whole and healthy? So the book is called Healing Leadership Trauma, Finding Emotional Health and Helping Others Flourish. We just barely scratched the surface, I know. So you guys are going to have to go pick it up, read it. How can we stay tuned into what you guys are doing and especially with this message?
Yeah. Well, I'm on Instagram and Facebook primarily. If you do at @SWiseRowe on Facebook, that's my handle. And then Instagram, it's at Sheila Wise Rowe and SheilaWiseRowe.com. And you'll find.
Yeah. I was about to say, you know what? We can always have another conversation.
We need to have another conversation. We absolutely need to have another conversation.
Yeah.
I might be over promising here and revealing this too early, but our team is designing another podcast in the network called The Healing Leader that is all for leaders as they're trying to help other people heal. And so we should absolutely have a much deeper dive conversation into this.
I don't know. I think there could be some good stuff up in there.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You can find me on Facebook, and I'm still on Twitter for the time being. At Facebook, it's at Griorowe, GRIOTROWE. I'm on Twitter these days, so it's Nick01902, and I have a website, nicholasrowephd.com as well, where I'm starting to gather some thoughts. So
I love it. Well, guys, we're going to put all those links in the show notes right underneath the YouTube video, so you guys can, if you're watching this, listen to this, you can reference it very easily. But thank you, Nicholas, Sheila. This has just been such an honor. Thank you for opening up this conversation with us.
It's great.
thank you very much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of the Nothing is Wasted podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation and found it as encouraging and insightful as we did. Now, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen, and leave us a rating and review. Your feedback helps us to connect to those who need these stories of hope and healing most, and to reach more listeners just like you. Also, subscribe to our Nothing is Wasted Ministries YouTube channel. Now, be sure to stay connected with us on social media. You can follow us at Nothing is Wasted Ministries. Follow me at Davey Blackburn. We'd love to interact with you, so be sure to stop by and let us know how these conversations are impacting you and your story. And if you want to learn more about all the incredible resources we have available to help you navigate whatever valley you're walking through, visit our website at nothingiswasted.com. If you're ready to get started in your journey towards healing and finding purpose in your pain, we'd love to help. Simply go to nothingiswasted.com/start here for your next step. We want to thank our guests, and we want to thank you, our Nothing is Wasted community, for tuning in regularly. Remember, no matter what challenges you face, whatever pain you are walking through, nothing is wasted. We'll see you next time for another incredible conversation here on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. But before you go, check out this short clip from our next episode. Thanks for joining us, friends.
What would you say to that peer or maybe a young pastor? What would you say to them when they are faced, when they have people in their congregations or in their sphere of influence who are so brokenhearted? What would you say to that leader?
I think you lead by example. When you go into a situation like no one really knows what to do. And sometimes it's better to be around people who are willing to take a risk of faith and say, in essence, I don't know if I can handle this, but that shouldn't be excuse for not trusting the Lord with what little faith I think I have right now. And I would just say, brother or sister, just show up and realize that you are trusting a sovereign God who is actually in control of that situation, even if it looks like it's out of control. The Lord is already there. You just need to go and meet him with what little faith you have. And that will be a model to those who are going through this grief. It's not about having answers. It's about having faith.